Hello again. We are here in St. Mary's Church. It's been a very busy week in our renovation, and hopefully I want to be able to show to you, while we're not in church, it's because many things are happening that would not be able to occur were we using this on a regular basis. And so this first slide is actually a repeat from the last information session that we had, and it discusses our need for a new electrical service. We had talked at that time about upgrading the electrical service to the church from 400 amps to 800, the need to install a cement pad, a transformer, and to be able to bring electrical service from a pole underground to that transformer. Our next slide makes us realize that we went from 400, which is our current service, to investigate how we would install 800 amps, to the realization now that National Grid has said we could be able to have the power that we need with 600 amps. Beyond just simply numbers, it's an important detail because it means 600 amps can go overhead from the pole to the building and inside. We don't need to install the transformer and the pad and a conduit underground. So that's a significant savings over money that had not initially been budgeted, but that we were trying to be able to put aside to be able to afford this cost. We don't need to do that, so our lead time is less, our expense is considerably less, and yet we will still have more service, more electrical service, and therefore what we need in order to be able to provide the service, the electrical power to the building that we need for our lights and for the heating and the air conditioning. The next slide shows us things that were done. There's a coring of the granite walls. The lower level of our church is 37 inches thick from the outside to the inside, and it's solid masonry with the exception of a plaster facing in the lower church. Holes were cored through the granite so that the tubing can pass from the heat pumps, which will be outside, to bring in the cool air or the hot air to be able to either heat or cool the church in the climate that is needed. Our next slide shows you what the inside of those holes look like. They come into the lower church. So the very first picture shows you what it looks like, the size of them from a distance by the entrance ramp in the lower church. And then there's a close-up that shows you that it actually goes through 37 inches of granite. They tell me, and it's pink granite. Once you core it out, it is pink on the inside. Our next slide takes us back up to the upper church, and here is where our heating and our ventilation is now being installed. And so the church will look very different if you come this weekend. You'll see that there are conduits and wires that run along the top of the former wainscoting, which is an indicator that the new wainscoting will be higher than what we were used to in order to be able to adequately cover or camouflage the units and all of the wiring that needs to be done. We can't bury that into the walls because the walls are solid masonry, so we have to install it on the inside and then cover that with a wood decoration. I'm going to go over to the side here, and with that be able to point out to you some of the wires that you'll see in this wiring that comes above the wainscoting. It may be hard to make out against the dark wood that's already here, but you'll see that there are two sets of pipes that are covered in black insulation. This is to insulate these pipes to keep either the hot or the cold that is in that from changing the temperature from what it is until it reaches to the lower units that will push out hot or cold air into the church in order to either cool it in the summer or heat it in the winter. These boxes that you see between those are where the power will be to run, with the electrical power to run those units to be able to power the fans that will discharge the hot or cold air into the church. The wire that runs above it that has these red junction points is actually the fire alarm. So this highest conduit will be covered, but the red box above it is actually be seen Once the church is finished, that will have a strobe light and horn, so that in the event of an emergency and the building would need to be evacuated, the alarm would go off, and when we would see that, we would know that we would need to exit the building at that time. One of the small details of this too is that right now the parish center and the church are all on a single unit. We're working with the fire department to make sure that everything is to code so that we can keep the parish center as one unit and the church as a separate, so that if either building were to have an emergency, we would have the ability to evacuate into the other building rather than needing to go completely outside in whatever the elements might be on the day of a given emergency. So that would mean that if something were to burn in the kitchen of the parish center, we wouldn't hear the alarm go off in the church as we would now. In turn, if something were to set off a fire here in the church, it wouldn't sound in the hall or in the classrooms of the church. They would be separate. The local fire department would be notified, but the two buildings would not need to be evacuated if there were an incident an incident in either of the facilities. Along the bottom are other wires that are other tubing that is also insulated, and with them you'll see that there are holes that have been drilled through the floor into the lower church. And so that piping carries things again from the units to these blowers and then back to the condensers to be either reheated or recooled. It also brings the same ability into the lower church. Up until now, there's only been one thermostat for the entire building, and so the lower church was heated by residual heat. As the upper church was being heated, the pipes that came through the lower church heated that. We will now have a separate thermostat, separate blowers, so that the lower church will be climate controlled in a completely separate unit than the climate control up here in the upper church. So those things are, in a couple of weeks, will not be seen, while people who come back in a couple of months or who come to our church in the years ahead will never see any of this. It will all be camouflaged or hidden behind the new wainscoting that will be installed once everything is in place. You may remember that in the southwest corner, the corner of the nave closest to the bell tower, we had some pews marked off, and then we've had it designated as a non-seating area. And so in the last couple of weeks, with all of the heavy rain that we've had, as well as the work that's being done, the plaster has seemed to separate. So our concern right now is that the plaster not fall. We're working to remove the Station of the Cross so that it will not fall and be damaged. But our first priority was to be able to establish some scaffolding to make sure that if it does fall, it will not injure any of our workers or any of our worshipers, people who would come on the weekend. So when you come this weekend, you'll see that there is scaffolding there. That's for your safety, as well as for anybody else that comes into our church. If you sit towards the back of the church, you'll have a little bit of a different view as well. You'll see that there's scaffolding outside the choir loft, and when you come forward and look back, you'll see that there's more scaffolding in the choir loft that takes you several feet up into the space. That's because there's a hatch on the back side of the arch that leads to the attic of the church. There is a space, probably about 12 to 15 feet in height, with a catwalk that runs the length of the nave of the church. So right at the peak of the ceiling, there is a walkway above that. We are looking to install a lifeline, which would have a cable that any worker would have a harness to attach to, so that if they were to misstep or the chance to be able to fall, it would prevent a tragic fall and be able to catch them, because otherwise it could be a lethal drop. So we're in the process of creating that. We need to put scaffolding up because the fire prevention for the fire alarm and some of the wiring for the lighting needs to be placed up there. So we need to see that workers there now are kept safe and that everything is done according to building and working code, and that will remain. It will be part of the fixture of the church. You won't see it, but it will be there to be able to protect the people who take care of the church, who change our lights, and for any other reason that we would need to get up there to maintain the building going forward. Our next slide shows us, actually, this is Fred Shea, who is the president of Stained Glass Resources. They've removed the 4 windows. They've been working on them. We've detailed some of that in our last session. Here is Fred with one of the templates for the arch of the window that he showed to a couple of our committee members, and he has notified us that they will be here the week of September 14th. So the 4 windows that have been removed should return. Expect that you'll see a noticeable difference. The glass should be clearer, the colors should be more vivid, and of course, along with the original donors from 1910, there will be our 21st century donors who have paid for this refurbishment. Our next slide takes us to the lower church, and here you'll see again why we're not using either the upper or lower church, because the work is taking place in both locations. This first smaller picture is actually of the window under the stairway that leads towards the parish hall. And so that has been removed for them to be able to install the piping that they need to. The larger picture shows you a little bit of a wider angle to that particular area. You'll see that at the very top near the ceiling is again a black line. That's actually an insulated tubing. That's taking the condensation from the blowers and being able to return it to the heat pumps that will be installed outside in the eventual work. The next slide shows us the proscenium arch over the altar, and what you'll see there is that there are conduits that are being installed to run some of the electrical wiring and the fire alarm wiring as well. Again, it's hard because of the plaster and the masonry in the building to bury anything inside of what's already constructed. So what we will be looking to do is eventually to cover this with a wooden soffit that will be painted in the final finish or design that we plan for the lower church. That's not in our immediate plans because we need to invest what resources we have upstairs in the renovation of the church. Again, I'm just showing the slides again. The next slide is with regard to the proposal for the rear wall of the sanctuary. We're looking to be able to have a couple other contractors bid on how they might recommend the design and the decoration of our church. What we're hoping to do is to be able to take an area around the window, Station of the Cross, the columns, and some of the arches in the side aisle, to be able to paint it with the colors and the design that we would like, to be able to get an idea of how it would actually look in the lighting and in the space that we have, to be able to show people, even though we're not painting the whole church, we have a vision. That's our design, that's our plan, that's where we're heading to. So we're hoping that we will have enough in our budget to be able to provide for that. So once again, your donations and your pledges are very, very helpful to be able to continue to accomplish this work. These 4 Stations of the Cross, the 4 stained glass windows are costing us in the vicinity of $100,000 that will be paid before the end of September. The pews and the woodwork, the wainscoting, all of that will be another $45,000 to $50,000 that we will need to pay out by the end of October. And then the heating system is costing us in the vicinity of $500,000. So all of the funds that we have received to date are being used. They've been set aside either through your donations to One Family, One Faith, Our Future Together, or through the second collections that we provide each week in our church. We used to pass the basket before the pandemic. Now, if you come to church, you'll notice that there are 2 baskets. One, usually on the left, is for your regular offertory donation, and the one on the right is for the second collection. Again, if people can continue to help us with that, that will help us in a long way to be able to continue to provide the funds that we need in order to be able to continue to go forward with our work. If you're not coming to church, but you are willing to participate, but you didn't make a pledge, but you're willing to help us out, you can do that by mailing a check to us or going online to WeShare. And with that, you can be able then to make a contribution either as a pledge or as part of the second collection. If you've made a pledge but you want to make an additional gift as a second collection electronically, there is that option on the WeShare page for St. Mary's Parish. As always, we appreciate your support and your cooperation. Please tell others if this is informative and helpful to you so that others can know much work is being done, which is why we're not able to be in church right now, but it's moving at a good pace, and we're hoping that things can be done in a timely manner. We're expecting that there should be some kind of heat in the building. This week, the first shipment of the units that go along the wall will arrive. Hopefully, the week of Labor Day, they'll be able to be installed. So if we have more something to show you, we'll be back in a week. If not, within 2 weeks, we'll give you an update then. Thank you for your support and your interest.